Good morning, everyone. I'm Jack McCullough, and welcome to the third and final day of the CFO Masterclass. I woke up this morning and for the first time I realized that we're closing the conference on Friday the 13th. Oops, I apologize. You didn't get to see me for a few seconds. Anyway, so I woke up and realized that we're closing on Friday the 13th. And so Friday the 13th in 2020, what could possibly go wrong? So anyway, we're really glad you can join us today. I think it's fair to say that as an organization, we've never had more important discussions than the ones that are set to take place today. We're closing the conference with discussions on diversity and inclusion, followed by one on ethics. And while both of these have been paramount topics to finance chiefs over the years, they've taken on increased importance due to the events of 2020. Some of our other panel discussions will focus on technology for competitive advantage, rapid decision-making, and developing a finance team. And when you look back on 2020, any list of the hottest companies this year are going to include Peloton and Robinhood. And we're really excited because both of their CFOs are here with us today. So we kick off today actually with a great panel. We are going to be focusing on mastering technology for competitive advantage. And what we've learned is that companies who invest in technology are thriving, while those who do not are struggling. The instinct to reduce your technology spend is understandable. As it turns out, it's also wrong. For most companies, reducing investing in technology will not help its survival. It will simply result in a slower death. There are some improvements to technology where the ROI is almost immediate, and we have some great CFOs available to discuss that. I feel fortunate that three of the CFOs on the panel, not only great CFOs in Joe, Gita, and Jonathan, but they're also friends of mine, and they are also founding members of the steering committee in their respective chapters. They'll be joined by Raul Vega, who's the CEO of our longtime partner, Oxys, and the conversation is going to be moderated by my colleague, John Gimpert. John is going to lead a great discussion. And John, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for kicking things off for day two. And like you outlined there, I think there's been a lot of conversations over the last 2 days that were really important for CFOs. And I think we're going to continue that level of conversation today. And so here's a couple things I just want to kick off with. First, as Jack said, we have an awesome panel who's going to share their insights and their experiences around really deploying the new technologies today. So since this is about technology, I would encourage you to really take advantage of the technology of this platform that we're using today. Chat with each other, use the question queue to place your questions, share what's jumping out to you. And don't forget, go out to Twitter or to LinkedIn and share the experiences you're having through the course of not only this conversation, but the rest of them you're going to have today. Let other CFOs know what you're going through and what you're learning. Share the experience with them. Today, as Jack said, we have a seasoned group of speakers. One is a CEO who talks to executives all the time, a couple of CFOs, as well as a venture partner. So a well-rounded partner who's going to really hit this topic in a 360 view. So let's do a round of intros. And we're going to start with you, Joe. Joe, kick it off. A couple minutes of who you are, what you're about. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, John, thanks so much. And Jack, thanks so much for the invite. Good morning to everyone. I'm Joe Falcao. I'm the CFO of Thrasio. Thrasio is a fast-growing company in the e-commerce space. They're based in Boston. In fact, I'm calling from our HQ in Walpole, Mass. We achieved the status as unicorn a few months ago, less than 2 years since the company was founded. So as we are in the ecosystem of dealing with the customers, getting an understanding of the customer pattern, what they buy is critical for us. So I'll be happy to provide insights from Tracio, but also on the days when I worked at Dunkin' Donuts, Dunkin' Brands, where we knew exactly who and where and when the cup of coffee was acquired and bought. So happy to have a great dialogue with the fellow panelists here. And thanks, John, for the invite.
Thanks, Joe. Geeta? Want to kick it off?
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Geeta Sharifi. I work with Lifelong Learning Administration Corp. We manage several charter schools, online programs. We serve over 40,000 students alone in California. So I'm in the education industry, nonprofit, and obviously with California and the state funding, there's a lot of challenges to deploy new technology to support us. So I'll be happy to share all of that. We just launched a, a new online program virtually. All the schools are free, they're public schools. So I'm happy to share all that with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Jonathan?
Good morning. Ooh.
Good morning.
I had a little glitch there. Must be Friday the 13th.
It is.
Anyway, good morning. My name is Jonathan Speed, and I am a venture partner at Waterman Ventures, which is part of the Alumni Venture Group, which is a 16 alumni founded venture firm. We work with top venture capitalists, co-investing, and I have an opportunity to talk to seed round to C-rounded companies. So I get to hear a lot about their technology and financial challenges. Prior to taking on this role, I spent about 8 years as a CFO in the SaaS e-learning space. And I'd be remiss if I didn't indicate that I'm the co-chair of the San Francisco chapter, but Nancy and Ken were the co-founders of the chapter. But I hope to bring my experience as a CFO at smaller companies and my experience as a venture partner to the table.
Thanks, Jonathan. And last but not least, Raul.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I had a little hiccup
it's okay.
myself. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Raul Vega. I'm the CEO of Oxys. Actually, it's a professional service firm focused really on the subject today, finance, transformation, but really a lot of it is IT oriented, IT driven, which is the opportunity we saw going back 23 years now when I was at Pepsi, which is where I was before. I was in a traditional finance role in the international division and really got involved in these types of subjects, technology, shared services as an employee there and led the first, really a lot of the first international projects in that area, and then started Oxys. So I've spent the last 20 years talking to a lot of middle market and really Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies, helping them go through these types of subjects. So look forward to the conversation today.
Well, thanks for being with us. And I think for all our attendees out there, I think you're going to get a sense just listening to the intros that we do, in fact, have a really well-rounded group here that can really hit this topic. And you're going to walk away with a lot of great learnings. Let me just kind of set the stage here quickly before we dive in. You know, technology is everywhere now. It's the core of every business. It's really how competitive advantage is being created. You know, it's how strategy is being shaped, it's being executed. It's how members in the business connect to coordinate all their collective energy to really make things happen in that business. Wednesday and Thursday, we heard about how the CFO must be a change agent, a strategist, an operator, and an innovator. Those are all really big jobs for any CFO on top of their normal finance and accounting responsibilities. What you're going to hear from this panel is for you to fulfill all those leadership roles I just talked about, you have to have a grounding in how technology is being deployed in your organization, not just in your finance function, but across the company. So with that, let's go to our panel. Let's hear from them. They'll share their experiences, their lessons learned, and I hope you're going to walk away with a lot of learnings that you can take back to your company. So Raul, let's start with you. You talk to executives every day. Technology is fast. Those are in the middle of all that. What's the foundational perspective CFOs should take when it comes to technology? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, when I really got into, I remember when I started my career at Price Waterhouse, I mean, we didn't even have computers. We didn't even have laptops. I mean, it didn't even exist. So then very quickly when I was at Pepsi, it was the first time I even heard what Windows was. And I think it was 1995 when I first heard what an ERP was. And obviously the world has just changed since then. And I think the biggest fundamental change is CEOs and I think the broader business realizing that they can't ignore technology at all, and it's critical to competitive advantage, which definitely wasn't the case. If you really look at it, finance were the early adopters of technology in the corporate space. I mean, it really started with the nerdy finance guys. You know, the sales and marketing people wouldn't want to admit that, but they were some of the biggest laggers out there. Anybody who tried to implement a CRM system 20 years ago knows what I'm talking about. Salespeople didn't want to share their contacts, and it was finance that led it. That's why you saw finance very often managing the IT function. And I think that's one of the biggest areas of change because given the pervasiveness of technology today, it's pretty impossible to say finance is going to be able to manage the technology function, in my opinion. It's just moving too fast and has gotten too complex, even for technology professionals. I often say the CIO role is one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult job in corporate America because of the breadth of technologies that they're supposed to stay on top of. So when I look at the CFO role, I do think there's a huge function and a big role to be played. I think it's a very different role that used to be played when IT was more limited. And I really think it comes down to information and really being at the axis of strategy and information and business processes. I think finance leaders and finance teams are uniquely positioned because of their role in a lot of the key processes to really drive that. And it really gets down to really the fundamentals of digital transformation. And I think the way people need to think about it, it's not really about the technology. And that may not sound like, what do you mean by that? Most digital transformation, and if you look at any survey, almost all these initiatives, I would say 60, 70% of them are considered to have been struggling or failed, i.e. they're going over budget, they're not delivering the business value. And that's because a technology focused approach is taken. Whereas I think finance professionals are much more grounded in the business process and the business value and can play a huge role in that, even if they're not directly managing all aspects of the IT. And the biggest piece of it is the analytics. You cannot really have successful digital transformation without good data. And we all know that's a big struggle. And that's where finance, I think, plays the biggest role. So really to summarize, I really think the CFOs can play a huge role, but they need to transform their departments, get out of being transaction processing shops, get them to be much more commercially oriented and more tech savvy.
Thanks. Hey, Joe, Jonathan, Geeta, pile on here. You know, what's your perspective on this? You know, what are your insights on how, you know, the whole change in technology has influenced your role and how you're actually being a leader in the organizations you're involved with or you're working with?
I can
Well,
start.
Go ahead, Jess.
Sure. Okay. I'll take the last sentence that Raul said about finance understanding the business, and I'll put that in a different perspective of the finance professionals need to walk the floor, not symbolically, but really walk the floor, meet customers, know how the products are assembled, if it's manufacturing, but try to understand the unit economics, how the company makes money, which is the genesis of the company being in existence, and what's the future. Once you get this map of the economic value creation, then if you overlay how the accounting books reflect that, then you have much more strong point of view of what technology levers you can use. One of the exercises I do when I join a company is try to understand where the company is, how it makes money, and where it wants to go in the future. Like when they grow up, what they want to be. And I try to assess the team that I have in terms of leadership. One of the tricks I do is take each member of my team, multiply the head count by 8 hours, and I multiply by 48 weeks a year. So that's a pool of hours that I have to lead, to get the best out of them, for each one of them to seek their own greatness. And what I try to measure is how the time is divided into 3 buckets: keeping the lights on, meaning compliance, process improvement, and profit needle. If I can get folks spending more time in profit needle, meaning they're impacting the business, then the finance can become a leader. If we are struggling closing the books all the time, compliance, manual work, it's demotivating. So we need to be able to insert technology to speed the effectiveness of this finance team. So in summary, finance is to be front and center, walk the floor, talk to folks. Second is find the right doses of technology to use, and not pick up the most quote unquote sexy technology of the day, but the most effective one, and try and dial it up as effective as possible, and be able to say no. The last point, I agree with Raul that it's better if the finance does not own the CIO office. It's better to be a separate function. And the reason of that, because CFO and CIO, they're so complex, and it's a better interest of the company to have them separate as you grow and create speed. So.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. Geeta, how about you? You were going to jump in there.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm with Raul. I think 20 years ago I started at a global advertising agency, and we didn't even have emails. You know, we had Mac because they were advertising, and we just had internal email communication. So we've gone so far. I mean, the technology has improved, and we need to like fast forward, you know, and follow and be behind it. So what I've experienced is that we need to, I mean, especially right now during COVID, we need to prioritize and look at our revenue cycle and see where technology falls. How can technology support to kind of speed up that revenue cycle process, and where those gaps are. So that's really our priority right now, to ensure that we have the right technology to deploy and prioritize. Obviously, making sure that the C-suite and everybody else is in line, and bring the strengths, you know, in my department, other departments. As far as the IT reporting to CFO, I've been a CFO for the past 17 years, and IT always reported to me in healthcare. And since I transitioned to education about 2 years ago, it's a separate department. So we don't outsource it, it's internal, but we have some brains that we bring in sometimes here and there to just support us. But again, I think priorities should be focused on assessing your gaps, especially given the circumstances right now with COVID. See where those gaps are to improve throughout your revenue cycle. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. How about you, Jonathan?
The panel sort of hit a lot of the high notes that I probably would have mentioned, but a couple things come to mind. And one is from one of my CFO colleagues out here, Sandy Clark. And at last year's event, she laughingly said that us CFOs need to stop using the word no and start asking why more often. So I deploy why a heck of a lot more now, as opposed to no, because if I sort of work with that why, I get a better assessment of, you know, what is it that each of the members of our important teams are trying to get to? What is the end solution? So one, I just start with why, and it starts off a much better conversation. I think the other thing is, you know, I sort of have a books ROI and a people ROI. And technology is sort of one of those funny things that if you don't really, you know, we buy it, but we don't always use it. And so it can look sort of quirky when you get to the end of the cycle and say, well, we didn't really use this, but the problem is that there may be one or two people sitting in a dark corner who actually are actively using it. And so you have to suss out who's using it, who's not using it, and then pare back for those non-users or educate those non-users in an appropriate fashion so that they are actually taking advantage. I mean, I love platforms like Slack, where once a team member is off, they send you a notification once a week. Here's the number of Slack messages. Here are the number of users. Here's who's no longer a user. Here's who we've taken off your bill. That doesn't happen with a lot of other platforms. So, I spent a lot of time, usually at least once a quarter, with our DevOps guy. And we would go through all of, the platforms we're using. And I went and found an Excel spreadsheet last night, and I realized that my last company, he alone had 29 different platforms. But he was judicious in going through and parsing and taking people off. And that's another story for another day. And then the last piece I would talk about a personal experience, and this goes back to GDPR. Back in November of 18, I sort of informed our executive team that, hey, this is coming down the pike. We're going to need to get to it. The CEO was sort of like, oh, this isn't a big deal. And which was ironic because he was from the EU. But what I realized I needed to do to get GDPR put through and get the right technology was to do a lot of research myself, document it, and present it to the executive team, then create an internal team made up of all the constituents who are going to have to address it, and then roll it out, and then sort of rinse and repeat. So we started the process in November of 18, and just before the day you had to get it done, we had all of our paperwork completed. But the irony is, it's not the paperwork, it was all the stuff that the team was going to have to do to constantly monitor and use a platform that was going to help us be successful. So those are sort of my comments there, not necessarily quite strategic, but I think it's really to say that you have to do, as Joseph said, you have to do a lot of walking on the floor. You got to talk to a lot of people. You have to ask why questions and get engaged, and walk through the demos yourself. Try it yourself, because you cannot ask cogent questions if you are not engaged with the actual platforms.
That's great. So be a wise CFO, not a no CFO. Walk the halls.
I really like no, though.
Yeah. Great. And we got a couple on the chat that said ugh when it really comes to all that compliance stuff. So, the pain is obvious, I guess. We're feeling it. But so let's pivot just a little bit. So CFO should be front and center, ask why, walk the halls, take a strategic view on really technology. So a lot of, when it comes to technology, it starts with, what do I really need? So as a group, what would you share in terms of what's the starting point? How do you start to understand what your company needs? And are there bright lines between the CFO and other people in the organization when it comes to technology, to thinking about those requirements for the company outside of finance? And, how does the CFO get involved in those discussions? Geeta, we'll start with you, and then maybe Jonathan will kind of move to you next. Go ahead.
Yeah, again, prioritizing. I think definitely having a project management tool to manage it. I always bring this example, like, if you want to set up a IKEA furniture, you have to follow directions. If you don't follow the directions, you're going to be left out with a piece of a nail or something left out. So having planning in place before you even choose your, who wants to do what. And time is of an essence. So I know all these technology platforms, deploying them takes a lot of time. So how to prioritize and what to bring on board first. I think that the strategic point of it is critical. But as far as the specific programs or tools or add-ons or all these things to enhance your technology. I think again it depends, on the environment that you live in. So, and then how you coordinate with the other departments. But definitely, I think CFOs are critical because I have a team procurement department under my lead, and they support other departments as far as choosing what they need, and they do all the financial analytics and identify pros and cons of the system. We don't make the decision for them, but we support them. So I think putting numbers to what you're going to be using is also important. So thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Jonathan, let's go to you.
So I've never had a procurement department. So as I think a lot of the CFOs in some of the smaller companies, especially the startups out here on the West Coast. And so I think it's sort of two things that I sort of end up doing. One is whoever is sort of seeking out technology is to really sit down with them in advance. And if they're going to look at 3 different technologies, I'm going to go to the demos with them and be more passive. I want to hear why they want to use that platform, and I want to hear the responses back from the provider. Where I will sit in and be fairly proactive is on the negotiation. So I negotiate every contract. Because I think just because you're small doesn't mean you can't negotiate. I negotiated with AWS, not to much avail, but but it was really important for me to understand that and then take that back and let the team members understand that each one of these tools has a cost, and that I'm willing to write that check, but let's make sure it's the check for the right product. And the only way I'm going to know if it's really the right product, at least instinctually, is if I've sat through sort of the process of the buying that particular product. Now, obviously, with so many different platforms, it's impossible to do it for everyone. So at some juncture, you sort of have to trust your team. But I think as everyone else on this panel has said, that's about walking the halls and really getting to know your team members. And I went through the process of going from Salesforce to Pipedrive to HubSpot, in a 4-year period. I inherited the first, but I think that journey was the one that got me to understand the need to get in early, because it all sounds great and all those platforms work well, but if the team is not going to use it, then all of a sudden someone says, oh, look, there's a new bright shiny object, let's go get it. But it was interesting. The people that I brought in to really do the next assessment were not necessarily folks that we'd always think of. And I think that's why you have to take a 360 approach. So I brought in our lead gen guy, for example, in looking at our CRM. And a lot of times the CRM, you're thinking, oh, this is all about the sales folks. But the marketing folks are intimately tied to it. And the lead gen person was really able to articulate a really good program looking at our CRM, such that we actually were getting 95% of our leads became inbound. So again, I think it's looking at your entire team, figuring out what other aspects to the buying decision they can bring to the table to help you make a sound financial decision.
Good. Thanks. Hey, Joe, let's go to you. What are your thoughts on that topic?
So I'll just give an example of, so the finance professional needs to understand the pain points of what the company is going through. In the case of the company I'm right now, Trustio, we are in the Amazon space, different Jonathan, from Amazon, not AWS, but the third-party sellers. So one of the pain points we had, we needed to have a credit card for each one of the accounts. So basically 200 credit cards, sort of. And the pain point was get a credit card that can monitor the expenses, and we need to create in 5 minutes. So it's very tough to get this from a bank. So it happens that I saw one of the sponsors of this event, which I'm very grateful for, Divi, is the one that we partnered with. We explained our needs, and we got this in place. We have the critical points for the business. So when we buy a company, we quickly can plug in a credit card, and my measure is 5 minutes, less than that, and I get a card printed, visual card. We have all the controls, and we have speed. And once we have this dialogue, we can have a conversation with them in terms of reward points, in terms of pricing, etc. Similar type of conversation as a partner with the way I like to see this, all the technology partners are part of the ecosystem that we can collaborate, and it's not to accept what they're saying, but it's to have a tough conversation at times, because we are all in this together. It's a win-win-win situation. So in summary, understand the pain points of the company. It's better the CFO can be, he or she can be hands-on. When I say feel it, is really try and get it done, do an Excel simulation, then you can ask the right questions. Then you're not distracted by the shiny items or the glossy PowerPoint slides. So.
Great, thanks, Joe. Hey, Raul, how about you? I think maybe if you could hit on this same idea, and what have you seen around really effective CFOs in terms of getting involved in these broader company decisions around what do we get, what do we buy, in that whole really just decisioning process? What are you seeing there in the executives you work with?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic, because what I see is, especially from the technology folks, they like to intimidate people from asking questions by throwing a bunch of jargon at you. And what happens, I see, is a lot of finance people are backing away from asking the hard, tough questions that if you really poke in there, you're going to uncover a lot of vaporware on their ideas. But that is a huge issue, because CFOs are getting intimidated that they don't really know enough to go there, so they don't go there. And I think it's important to realize you don't have to be an expert in the technology and all the different things, but there are processes and methods within technology that are the same regardless of which product you pick, which I think lends itself very well to the strong CFO. How are we going about selecting the right software? Did we gather the business requirements? Where are the gap analysis? How many client references did you take? Things like that that are very business process oriented are critical. Asking questions and just understanding the hierarchy of a successful business architecture, systems architecture. If you're trying to go out for the, hey, let's get this great analytics engine, but you know that your transaction processing systems are a mess, that your accounts payable is a mess, that your master data is a mess, being there and saying, why are we doing that first? That doesn't make any sense. We have to get our transactions in order and then build from there. So I think there's a lot of just fundamental, more business-oriented questions that you could be comfortable with, and you don't shy away of asking when they try to throw the tech at you. I think that's the fundamental that I see with really strong CFOs and really getting. And obviously, I think for sure, you got to understand the business, as everybody's been saying on this panel. I learned that, the reason I got excited when I was at Pepsi, I had a mentor, and he would send us I was riding trucks in the Caribbean and Mexico and learning how we were selling bottles. I literally went into people's houses and learned the business from the bottom up. So you got to bring that to the table to have credibility to ask those questions.
That's some really good insights there. So get involved. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Use common sense. Start with the foundation of your technology platform. Make sure that's where it should be before you pile anything else on top of it. That's great. So let's shift here for a minute. Sorry, Joe and Jonathan. I'm going to kind of move to you real quick, and then we'll ask others to jump in here. For the smaller companies out there, what should they be thinking about when it comes to planning? They're a little bit different, How can you drill down into that and give some insights around that in particular?
Sure. I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So, just in listening and thinking about, small companies and when you don't have a team, and I realized, well, in point of fact, I do have a team, and my team is twofold, two buckets. One are all my outsourced professionals. So like a lot of small companies, you have an accounting firm and a bank and a law firm and your insurance firm. And so I started to view them not as service providers, but as actual team members. And when I did that, a switch sort of flipped in my head that, you know, I could have really engaging conversations around a lot of technology because they were seeing what their portfolio companies were using. And so, you know, I wasn't being charged $800 an hour by my attorney or whatnot, because I was like, let's have a cup of coffee. I just want to get the lay of the land. And when I started to do that, things started to percolate up. And I'll use my accounting firm, you know, and we were looking at, you know, ASC 606, and there was also a meeting, our CFO Leadership Council, and KPMG was saying, well, you know, there's this small version of ASC 606, 600 pages, and there's a medium size, 300 pages, you know, and I went back and had a robust conversation with my accounting firm. And, you know, instead of going through 300 pages, we sort of went through intellectually what was going to have to happen for our books. And they were more than happy to engage me in that conversation because they knew if I was well-versed, it would make their lives a heck of a lot easier. So one, I would just say, make sure that you really take advantage of all the outsourced service providers that you have. They can give you great overviews of a lot of technologies that their companies are using, and provide you with a whole bunch of resources that you may not have, or you would spend an inordinate amount of time going to look for. I think the other is we've all worked at other organizations, or we are members of the CFO Leadership Council, and that is a phenomenal resource. Anybody who is probably on this particular panel, as well as all of our participants, if they're part of CFO Leadership, they'll see the daily Google email about people asking a wide variety of questions. And the great thing about this group is that once the question's been asked, you know, an Excel spreadsheet will come out with a slew of answers. And so I have found that, and those answers can be highly detailed to, here's what your unit cost is going to be if you do X, or here's how our employees are engaging this. So I think being able to take advantage of your external networks and of your service providers really helps a small company act more proactively, and get to the automation more quickly, and do it in a way that you probably shave off some time and reduce some cost. But we know that most implementations, I think maybe it was you, Raul, or Joseph, we all said, like, maybe it's 50% of them that work out. But if those 50% work out and they work out well, you're going to be in the black, not in the red.
Good, thanks. Hey, Joe, how about you?
Yeah, so in terms of background, prior to coming to Trustio, I had a journey of working for global companies where all the process were defined, similar like you, Raul, at PepsiCo. I worked for Solvay, I worked for Dunkin' Brands. So the process was in place. There was like what I call a treadmill there, and we could innovate like a couple of degrees, 30 degrees here or there. Then I started moving my career towards middle market and startup companies. So when I joined Trustio, there was a small desk, a computer, and problems to solve. So the first step was building up the financials as it went in terms of Excel spreadsheets, looking at all the bank statements and creating that. So once I got a feel of how things were working, then the step 2 was to move to a solution like QuickBooks. And step 3 was migrating, evolving to NetSuite. And this is in a span of 18 months, and two in-depth financial audits with foreign country transactions. So the background of this is what Jonathan said. Be aware of your ecosystem you're playing with, the banks, the accountants. They're there to help you. And also leverage this group. The CFO Leadership Council across the US and Canada is fantastic in terms of knowledge base. They're very smart and talented people. I had the benefit of joining the group 13 years ago. It's one of the first members in Boston. And I'm very grateful to this group, and grateful especially to Jack for having invited me to join. So my point again is the CFO can get out of their office virtually and walk the digital floors and ask questions, and also be able to help. So it's not just asking, it's a two-way direction. If any questions pose that you may have a perspective, that share the perspective, it helps this collective wisdom.
Thanks, Joe.
So I hope I get my free membership for next year, John. A little plug.
Thanks. Let's go to Gita. Any thoughts on that? From a smaller company perspective, what's unique and how do you have to think about deploying technology that's, different than when you kind of scaling up in a large organization?
Yeah, I think doesn't matter if it's small or large. There's certain things that you definitely have to consider. One is that if you're deploying a technology, making sure that you have, you're considering all the security, that goes around it. So you don't want, you want definitely that to be checked into. And then also, if you have the right people to deploy your technology, do you have the right infrastructure? Even if it's one person or two, do they have the capability to actually deploy that technology or the knowledge and the skill? If you don't, I would, as you scale up, I would outsource it, because when you outsource it with a small company, you get an array of expertise, right? Which you can't get in one or two people, and you have access to them. We deployed, we were moving our, when I was in healthcare, moving our clinical operations data capturing into the cloud. And we needed a lot of new reports and customized reports. So we contracted with a company who was based in Northern California, but they had most of their team members in India. So it was just fantastic. Every day at like 4 or 5 o'clock, when we received the request for specific reports, we would send a request, and 8 o'clock in the morning the next day the report was ready because the time difference. So you need to consider those things to ensure that the process goes smoothly. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Hey, we're going to shift real quickly to our next question. It's all about companies. They're not static. They're growing. They're changing. In some cases, they have to pivot quickly. And we know companies need to pivot sometimes fast, but technology not necessarily can be changed quickly. So let's kind of explore the topic of scaling and how static, systems can be, and how you kind of really reconcile all that. I'm going to go first to Raul, to you, because I think there's an important question here as part of that. What's your point of view really on outsourcing as a way to, really accelerate the adoption of the latest technologies, right? That's one way to do it. Share a little insights about that. When's it make sense? How do you think about it in terms of this whole idea of scaling and systems being static at times?
Right. In terms of outsourcing, you're talking about within the technology function or more broadly
Yes.
speaking? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I think one of the keys with technology, and it really ties to the scalability for sure, but across a broad range, technology is so complicated and changing so fast that anybody who tries to do that all in-house is absolutely kidding themselves. All right. I mean, just think about what you need to know if you're the CIO. You need to know about telecommunications, business applications, databases, application development, project management, governance, business processes. It's way too much. And technology is constantly changing, right? So the view to me about how you look at outsourcing, it all starts with what's commercially the focus of your business. What are those core competencies that are going to really drive commercial value, right? What's going to make a difference in the eye of the customer that you think is proprietary and is key? That's what you need to do in-house. Everything else is a candidate to be outsourced. So when it comes to technology, your help desk, your network, all those things, they're not going to make a difference. I don't care what business you're in. If you're selling apparel or if you're sending Dunkin' Donuts coffee, okay, it's not going to really make a difference to the consumer, So then it comes to business applications. Not all business applications are created equal. Your financial systems, very likely not going to give you competitive advantage, but could distract the heck out of your IT team. So typically it's either product related or marketing related. Those types of things are where you need to do. So what you need to do is build an IT strategy that's both systems and structure that supports the business strategy, and the org follows that. And then really have good management to build that ecosystem, a collaborative ecosystem where everybody's pulling in the same direction. Your vendors want you to be successful if you pick the right vendor, right? And they're going to give you that additional added value. So when it comes to new technologies and things like that, you want that vendor to bring that to you. You want them to be the innovation engine, to give you those thoughts, to do all that research and filtering that you don't have the time to do or your team doesn't. It doesn't mean the team isn't capable. They just don't have the time, and they should be focused on other things.
Great, thanks. Hey, Jonathan, let's kind of quickly go to you.
So I don't have actually much to add to what Raul said. I think this is a lot about, process. And I think what I would add to that is explaining your process to your team. So, I think sometimes as CFOs or senior leaders, we sort of think that everyone we work with understands the process that we are implementing to get things done, or why we've outsourced as opposed to, brought a piece of technology in-house. So I think, like most of us, we do our year-end wrap-up with our exec teams. And so I will always sort of walk through the financial side because that was the house that I was running. But then all the other additional things that were layered in, I would do some sort of presentation around that. And usually I would start off with a sort of, this is what we said we were going to do, this is what we've done, and be more upbeat about it, but talk about the ways that we're going to go forward. So while I wouldn't start with doctrine, I would say, what is our strategy? Operationally, how are we going to do this? And then tactically, how does it get deployed? And who do we need to do this? And like a lot of companies I've gone into, I especially as a CFO, go in and I do like a 90-day listening tour. Well, obviously 90 days is not something that we can do in a lot of times these days. But I think wherever you're going to implement some technology, you have to do a good listening tour with the core users. And it's not just the VPs, but it's the ground troops who, if the VP may buy in, but if the ground troops don't have any incentive to deploy or to let you know where something's going awry, you're going to spend a lot of time revamping. So that's my quick take.
Okay, thanks. Real quick, I'm going to go to a question here because I think it's real relevant with the topic we're talking about here. And Joe, I'm going to go first to you, and then Jonathan, flip it back over to you because, based on your background and some of the things you've said already, here's the question. If you were starting a company now, would you start with a simpler, cheaper software, or would you start with an ERP? Knowing what you would need. That's the question. Now, I'm not looking for any endorsements of any vendors here, but it's more the concept and the approach, I think, is what the person's looking for.
Yeah, so I think I can relate this from my experience in the last 2 years. So step one, the basics of any CFO, you need to have a pulse on the numbers. How you're making money, where the money is, how is it being spent. Excel, given the level of complexity here, is not a bad tool. So I did that for, call it shy of a year. And in parallel, after 6 months, we migrated, and it's not endorsement here, to a solution the likes of QuickBooks. And then after the end of the fiscal year, which was 2019, this year we migrated to NetSuite. So the point here is how the CFO can see around the curves and understand each inflection point. And it's not the CFO and the team moving to a new technology platform, but you need to get the entire inner circle ecosystem within the company to support that journey. The CEO, you need a tone of the top to help this journey. If not, you can have a beautiful system, but irrelevant data. So you need to make sure the data is relevant as you keep evolving. If you migrate to a system very complex at first, you can put the organization in shock because they're paralyzed. No one knows how to run that system. It's too much complexity. So it's an interesting equation of managing the complexity, the timing, and the capability of the company and of the finance team. This equation, the CFO has to try and understand the trade-offs. So, okay.
Good, thank you. Hey, we're gonna keep moving here because we got a couple other really great questions I want to kind of get into for the panel. Raul, I'm gonna go to you real quick. You know, CFOs have gotten burned because of technology projects. You know, what are the top really technology program risks CFOs should have their antennas up for and be watching for, right? What's your experience? What should CFOs be watching for? And then everybody else, you know, jump in here and add to Raul's comments. Go, take it away.
Thanks, John. I mean, one of the biggest ones I see, and I think CFOs can play a great role, is people leading with technology, doing what I call drinking the vendor Kool-Aid, and not really focus on what are the business outcomes, the business processes that we're seeking to do with this initiative. That to me is by far number one. Everybody loves the big demos and the fancy technology, and no one asks hard enough questions of why are we doing it? Does this investment make sense? Is it going to drive? What value are we going to get on the other side? So that's fundamental where I think a CFO can play a great role. The second big one tied to that is getting alignment across the organization of why we're making these investments and what's it really going to take and what we're getting. If the team is not aligned, you know, it's the beginning of the end, right? So they rush to picking a software, then try to figure it out afterwards. That project is already getting ready to derail. The third one, which ties to the vendor Kool-Aid, is being very unrealistic about what it's going to take to actually implement it. And more importantly, get the organization to adopt the systems and processes, which is the ultimate success of any initiative. It's not, oh, we got it up and running. No, are people actually using it? And are we getting what we expected out of it? And most people, where they have the issues, is they were sold that it was going to be really easy, not going to require a lot of people's time. We're going to get it done. Don't worry about it. And then you buy it, you start implementing it, and there's change orders coming. The organization's all distracted, and it's a disaster. And that happens because you're not being realistic at the very beginning by doing the business requirements before you select the software, by really talking to other customers and really figuring out what it's going to take and knowing your own organization. Are you ready? You know, as Joseph was just saying, are you ready to really take this on and really do what it takes to be successful? People tend to have a tendency, a bias to almost kind of lie to yourself, to kind of think it's going to be easier than it is. And that's a problem. And that extends to really making sure you put the best people on this initiative, which is important not only to design it, but to also the adoption. When people go back to the ground, they respect the top people in the organization who saying, you know, this works, this is the right way to do it. Forget all the change management practices. That's the number one. You got the smart, respected people in the organization that believe in the new solution.
Great, thanks. Jonathan, Joe, Gita, any thoughts, comments? Jump in here.
Just
Yeah,
two
the point.
comments.
Okay.
I think as you map out your technology strategy and you're matching that up with financial metrics, is to one, just be is to be aware that some of these systems don't really talk well with each other. So make sure that you're not forced to use a lot of third-party connectors because your data can get corrupted. So I think just making sure that everyone says, look, we have an open API, but you know that can be faulty. So just making sure that your systems do connect with one another, because that can take a lot of time. And then second is, you know, as your vendors expand their suite of products, if the product is not necessarily well integrated with their primary product, be aware, because they're going to be going through their own hiccups in making sure that that technology is actually working appropriately. And again, you could be using something and they roll out a beta and you go, oh my God, this is going to be great. It's going to save me a lot of time. I don't have to go find another vendor. It's cheap. And you'll find out that it doesn't do what the other product does better.
So Jonathan, is that where getting good references and talking to other customers of that vendor come in?
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of times, that suggestion will come from another leader who you don't have, that you may not know very well, or you don't have a great relationship with, or it's your CEO, and they're pounding their fists saying, "We've got to do this. This is going to make us so much more efficient." So I think bringing the vendors in, and certainly the network effect, and then being able to showcase. So this is almost my why version to the CEO, and my ability to deflect implementation of something that's not necessarily going to be fruitful is by doing a peer-to-peer with our CEO to say, hey, this isn't really at prime time yet, but I think this is, I think collectively everyone's talked about, the needs to foster really good relationships with the folks in your organization, because you can get to better solutions by spending that extra time. So I imagine that Joseph, when he maps out all these hours, probably that first hour is having coffee at Dunkin' Donuts, and saying, inform me, educate me, tell me what's going right, what's going wrong. And 57 minutes is him listening, and 3 minutes is him, giving some
Hey,
feedback.
Joe, you want to?
I would also add, definitely, what Raul touched on was the strategic plan, IT plan, but a lot of times surprises happen, right? So for us serving 40,000 students, right after this COVID, we went locked down, we had to dispatch over 25,000 laptops and hotspots to the students. So just imagine, we did not have the right inventory software in place. We have over 100 school sites, in California. So just knowing that that's something that's critical for the business, immediately we had to, get on that and get the right software. But it was a surprise, right? It disrupted the business process. So you need to also put aside time and effort to make sure that you watch for those surprises.
Thanks a lot. Hey, Joe.
Yeah, if I can add to the comments, and let's speak about what Raul said, and I like the Dunkin' coffee, Jonathan, so I appreciate that. Is when you hear the presentation from a vendor, I try to understand which of the biases they have, underlying biases and motivations. Generally, the team presenting, they have awesome slides. The deck is well polished, and the motivation at times to make the sale, which is fine, it's fair, despite how they're driven. But you have to see, and the word from Raul was fantastic, what success means for you as a company and for the value creation. So try to dissect all of that. And I'll go back to the plug to the CFO Leadership Council, at times asking this trusted group of 700 friends across the country, what you think about this solution can be an alternative. And this is kept private. No one within the group should be sharing this information out. It's a way to avoid biases and avoid any blind spots we may have. So let's try to take a step back while sipping the cup of Dunkin' coffee and see which are the biases they're having when they're selling that solution. Is that the right thing for your company, or is this another shiny toy in your toolkit?
Great, thanks.
John, I want to add one more point, John.
Go ahead, Rob.
I think it's important because when it comes to the agile and the scalability, one of the things you need to watch out for is customizations. Okay. And that's a huge problem with smaller companies, because very often your IT person may be a developer. And if you have a developer as your lead IT person, red flags should be going off everywhere you meet with this person, because they just have a bias to want to build. And that may not necessarily be the right thing for the business. And then you wind up having a lot of risk associated with that person and a lot of scalability and flexibility issues. So that is something to really understand why and push hard. Why are we customizing? And it better be a really, really good reason.
Good insight.
John, and I think that's really interesting. One of the things that I got actively engaged in was interviewing. So interviewing our engineers, interviewing the folks that we're going to be implementing, because I wanted to understand their biases from the get-go. I didn't really have a decision-making capacity, but I had the opportunity to sort of understand who was coming into the organization and to begin that process. So just wanted to add that as an additional duty for the CFO.
Yep, cool. Hey, so I'm going to try to get one more point in here in one question. Talk about how you justify tech spend when budgets are historically tight. I think CFOs have been dealing with this forever. It's not, and I think we touched on a little bit here and there, but maybe specifically we can dive into this. You know, how do you justify spend when budgets are tight? That's really about, I think, going back to some of the things each of you said about you got to show there's real value when it comes to really making decisions and writing the checks for technology. But talk a little bit about that. Raul, we'll go with you.
All right. I mean, there's a lot of different layers to that question, but I'll keep it brief. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to a business case, right? Fundamental business case. And it really gets down to, you know, there's so many different layers, right? Is it cost avoidance? Is it productivity? Is it scalability? Is it risk? There's all these different factors to an investment. I think it depends how you look at IT as an organization. If you're looking at it as just a cost item, which I have huge issues with that. Most companies, if you look at when we go into organizations, they're underspending in IT and they're not spending enough. And the reason is they tend to have outdated ways of looking at IT. We're spending X percentage of IT, X percentage of revenue on IT, and they look at it based on, okay, here's the budget for labor, hardware, software, and it's all in the IT department. And that's just fundamentally flawed. It should be about what are the services that IT is providing to the business, and the business is the one that's usually demanding that. So you need to rethink your whole costing models around the business activities, and IT is a component. RPA is a great example. It's an easy example. If you're investing in RPA and you look at it as an incremental IT investment, but then you get this benefit, let's say in operations, they both should be going in operations, the benefit and the investment. So I think it really is how you look at IT spend and investment. And I think people are looking at it as an SG&A item and then putting the benefit on the business side, and then it gets all out of whack. Quick answer.
Anybody else?
I just want to add, don't forget to train your team, you know, so put aside time, and whoever's using the end user, you know, they all say, we don't have time today, or I couldn't attend, or make sure you have a plan in place to make sure they're properly trained, because that's critical.
Good, thanks. Okay, any other thoughts on that question? Okay, maybe we can, you know, turn to kind of going to a little bit of a wind down of the session here. You know, as we started, our starting point was, you know, CFOs, if you're going to play all this role around a strategist, an operator, an innovator, you know, change agent, you know, throw some more titles on that. You know, you got to be able to get your hands around technology. You don't need to be a deep expert in it, but I think, you know, the advice, you know, I heard today was, you know, jump into this, you know, use common sense, you know, ask the good questions, you know, make sure you're engaging the team, walk the halls, you know, get out there and kind of break through, and you can do it. But for each of you, what would be the couple of points you would share with our attendees in terms of how do you ramp up personally around technology? What are the 2 or 3 things that they put on their to-do list and act on when they go back to their offices on Monday? Geeta, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would be very collaborative with other departments versus no, I'm not signing, I'm not approving or approving this. So very collaborative, and be tell them that we're here to support them. You know, to pull out the analytical data, why you need that technology and where does it fit within the organization as far as efficiency. We just rolled out one add-on to our financial system that saved over, I would say, a week of one person's time. So those are valuable to the organization. So let your other team members or other departments know that finance can support in that area to have a more stronger maybe proposal so that you can get everybody in line.
Great. Joe?
Yeah, I think one perspective for the CFO is to learn what's out there. And there's a lot of learning from these emerging technology companies because they have mastered understanding the pain points and provided a solution. So this going to webinars, listening to what they have can provide a CFO perspective that they can come back to the organization and share that within the other groups. So that it's a way to ask smart questions because you're framing that in a way that provides a solution. And also once that need is understood, we can say, well, is this the amount of money we need to pay for that? Because we know how much other companies, other providers are charging. So once again, spend time reading. Reading the CIO magazine can be a great tool as well, not just the CFO magazine, and attending IT conferences. Every time you get out of your comfort zone is a way to learn.
Great. Jonathan, real quick.
Yeah. My sum is, so listen, learn, and vet, team test, analyze it, deploy or kill quickly, and then sort of repeat the cycle. And this is, I think, true of most departments. But I think the friend who's in the AI space said, when your folks come to you and ask for $1 million for a project, you need to usher them out the door. When they come in and they offer you a $50,000 project, consider that. And this was a guy who's like, I sell $1 million solutions, but it's silly for you to think that AI is going to solve all your business problems or make you gobs of money. You really have to analyze it because all the things that we're talking about, they're tools. And they're tools that are going to be wielded by your employees. So this is, again, why I'm all about the listening, learning, and vetting with the team, and then finding the right tools as opposed to finding a tool and then forcing that onto the team.
Great. Thanks, Raul. How about you?
Yeah, real quick. I mean, what I would add is a couple things. One is I wouldn't try to become a tech expert on the different technologies. You're probably not going to keep up there. It's very difficult. What you should do is become an expert on governance, IT governance practices, things like IDLE, and those aspects are going to give you a lot of the fundamental processes that should be being done by IT. So I think that's where I would focus. So enterprise architecture is there's a book called Enterprise Architecture Strategy. I would advise you read that book. It's going to give you a lot of insight at a big picture, but then IDLE's another thing and other governance things. Secondly, I would cultivate some advisors or colleagues that are really good IT experts outside your company. That could be a sounding board for you, not just finance folks, but some CIOs. They benefit from learning the finance perspective. You learn the CIO perspective, or it could be vendors that you have that really can give you an outside point of view. And it's not going to cost you anything. It's building professional relationships outside the function, I think would be the second key thing that I would do. But I wouldn't try to be the tech expert. That's a tough thing.
Yeah, great advice from everybody. So we have to wrap up. We could probably go on another hour. So I'm going to thank the panel. Super job. We got a lot of great feedback. So thank you for sharing your time with us and your insights. And with that, I'm going to say thanks and move on to the next session. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And once again, thanks to the super panel.